Hi, Tracy from Nature's Heart. Today I want to talk a little bit about something called shadow work. And I'm wondering if you've ever had that feeling when something comes up or you're in a situation and you feel, oh, something's coming up for me, or I'm feeling kind of heavy. That is often a sign of shadow coming to the surface. So I was recently asked about shadow work, and it just got me reflecting on my own journey and how it not really until recently that I've been comfortable with the term and actually understood what it meant for me. So I'm going to be speaking about my own experience, and of course it could be completely different for others. So you know, when I'm speaking, it's based on my own experience. So this is moving into the realm of earth medicine and even into NLP coaching, which are two other modalities that I work with. So I just want to briefly explain what those are. Earth medicine is a way of connecting with ourselves by connecting to nature. It works with some shamanic practices that we find throughout indigenous cultures all over the world. NLP is neuro-linguistic programming, and neuro means our neurology. It's how we gather information from the world through our senses. Linguistic, of course, is language. So it's how we use our words to describe our experience and to label our experience. And the programming part is the relationship between these two, between the neurology and the language. And it actually talks about the power of the language to actually shift our perception. So it's a very powerful tool. Language. My background's in linguistics, so language is I think an untapped resource. It's something that we have access to, and we don't always appreciate the power of our language. So when I'm talking about shadows, I'm talking about aspects of ourselves or parts of ourselves that we don't like. Those parts of ourselves that we really hope nobody knows about us, or those things that we really don't want people to see about us. They're often referred to as darker energies or heavier vibrations, lower vibration things like anger and fear and jealousy, those kinds of either trapped emotions or personality aspects. So what comes up when we talk about shadow work is people are, it is uncomfortable, and a lot of people don't want to go there, and I get it. It is uncomfortable. I spent most of last year working on shadow work, and it is uncomfortable. And because it's uncomfortable, there's a huge benefit at the end. You know, the healing power of releasing and letting go of some of these shadows and bringing them some love and some light is incredibly powerful and incredibly healing. So the importance is that shadows are part of being human. We all have that balance of light, and we have that balance of darkness or shadow. And it's that balance that makes us human. So it's important to acknowledge that we do have both. And my experience is that if we push down the shadow, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it will come out. And it could come out as a physical illness, which was my experience. It could come out in any number of ways which are unpleasant. So in my experience, it's very, very beneficial to do some shadow work. And I'm not saying it's easy. It's really, really powerful work. So often we hear about shadow when we hear about Carl Jung's archetypes. And this is a new exploration for me, so I can't speak to it with any kind of authority. His archetypes are common personality characteristics that we find across human beings, and Jung talked about them having a light aspect and a shadow aspect. So sometimes you might hear shadow referred to in that way. My own experience with this in looking at some of my own healing work is when we think about things that are important to us and they're positive, often there's a shadow side to them. So when I look at things like integrity, for me that's something that's very important. There is a shadow side to that in perfectionism for me. So perfectionism is something that I've had to work on. Also looking at things like rigor or attention to detail. There's a shadow side of overthinking or even overwhelm, you know, looking at all of those details. So those are things to be aware of, that, you know, when we have a light side, there's a shadow side, and it's that balance that is part of our human experience. And we don't want to squash that shadow side. So what does it mean to do shadow work? In my experience, it's the awareness, bringing awareness to that feeling, that icky feeling, that heaviness. It's like, oh, and approaching it with a sense of curiosity, without shame and without judgment. Because of course, if we go into shame or judgment, we're further adding to that low vibration energy. We're adding more darkness, which just makes it heavier. So if I'm in a situation and I notice that heavy feeling, or I notice, oh, I'm feeling anger, or I'm feeling fear, if I'm able to detach from it and recognize that feeling, that's a really important first step. Our emotions really are messengers to us that something is important, that there's something juicy here for us to look at. So that awareness is like shining a light on that shadow, or giving it kind of a metaphorical voice. Often the shadows feel that they are left in the shadows because we put them there and we want them to be there. Remember, they're the things that we don't want people to know about, and often that we are avoiding in ourselves. So for me, it's like grabbing a piece of thread, you know, that awareness, that first sort of hint of that feeling of that, ooh, what is this? It's like grabbing a piece of thread that has been wound into a ball. So we grab this thread, and then it's attached, and we start to unravel it. And it can feel a little bit scary. You know, we've got this, we're pulling this thread, and oh, when is this going to end? It does end. That's my experience, because I was avoiding looking at some things that I thought were big. Actually, I thought they were more like this big, and they really weren't. They were actually more like this big. So, yes, it's... That's the other thing that I recognized, is that often we make these things into these big, huge things like this, and it's actually more like this. That's the other thing that I've learned, and I've heard others speak to that as well. So we're giving that light, that metaphorical voice to that shadow. So like grabbing the end of that thread, and that's wound into a ball. So when I'm looking at that, I think, well, what is this? What is this pointing to in me? It's like pulling that thread and unwinding it. And yeah, that can be uncomfortable. It's important to be able to sit with that discomfort. And we often talk about sitting with it. Well, what does that mean? It means not avoiding it. We're really good as humans at avoiding things. Last fall, I told you I was avoiding something that I thought was the size of my yoga ball. And once I actually looked at it, it was pretty okay. It was a lot more okay to deal with than I thought it would be. So that's the thing with shadows. They grow in these big, huge things, and they actually end up being something that's quite manageable. And my experience is that it's really worth the discomfort. Sitting with it, grabbing this little thread, unraveling it, the healing and the profound freedom that comes from working with shadow is worth the discomfort. Sometimes we know that we have wounds, or we know that there's a trauma, and we don't want to look at it. Again, it's that big shadow. So we cover it up with things like food or drink, or excessive activities, you know, helping others all the time, or exercising all the time, or cleaning all the time. I've actually caught myself cleaning my bathroom so that I could avoid working on some things that came up. So these kind of avoidance things are what we're really good at as humans. And what we need to be aware of is that our unconscious mind brings things up for us when they are ready to be healed. And that's an important thing to remember. So if we continue to avoid these things that have been brought to our attention, they grow, they persist, and that's when they can come out as disease or illness. And they can become critical. So it's really important to grab the string when it's this big and to be okay with sitting with it. The other piece that I found is important for myself is trusting that I am going to get to the end of this string, that it's not going to go on forever, and trusting myself that I am going to be able to get out of this darkness. And that's important, because often that fear, remember, it's looking like it's this big, that fear stops me from going and looking at it, and I need to trust that I am going to get to the other side, that the discomfort is not going to last forever. There is light on the other side of this shadow. So once we're aware of this shadow, what do we do with it? Let it go. We sit with it, we identify it, we label it, we use our language, and then we let it go. If we don't let it go, it can sit in our body. Unreleased emotions You know, we talk about emotions being emotions, not good or bad. The problem is if they're not released and allowed to move through our body, they sit in our body and can create blocks. And this is an important thing. So how do I let this go? Well, often we need help, and that's totally cool. And it's really good to get help when we need it. So coaching, counseling, energy work, some shamanic practices, journaling if you want to work on it on your own to help identify. So journaling, whether it's written journaling or art journaling, I'm a huge fan of both of those. My favorite way of releasing is a new technique that I've learned called timeline therapy. And it is part of an NLP coaching process. And I talked about NLP right at the beginning of this video. The reason I like timeline therapy is because it's fast, it's highly effective, and it doesn't require us to go back and relive the event or relive that trauma. It allows us to preserve the learnings and then let go of the emotion or the limiting the decision that has come about. So that letting go piece is the freedom that comes out of working with shadow work. So the other thing that I wanted to point out was often when we're working with shadow work, it's healing. I've talked about being nonlinear. It's kind of like a spiral staircase. And sometimes we feel like we're coming back, but we're actually not at the same place. We're actually at a higher level. So things do come back. My own experience last week, I had some things come up that from an event that I thought I had released everything, and then something came up and I needed to work through it. And it was a little bit discouraging because I thought, oh, I'd released all of this. I recognized with some time and sitting with it, I recognized that I was not in the same place. I was actually at a higher level on that spiral staircase of healing. So it's important for us to work with our shadow. It's important for us to recognize them. It's important for us to sit with them and to be okay with sitting with them. We don't want to crush them. We want to bring them out into the light, give them a voice, and give them love, and find that balance between our light and our shadow. So thanks for watching. Any comments or questions, please feel free to comment on the video, and I'm always available for questions. Thanks for watching.